as I understand, the Authenticity Project was your first novel. And I have to say, I don't know how you are going to top it, because it was certainly a good read for me. I really, really enjoyed it. So, and you've had other publications. Tell us a little bit about that, and I'll remove my phone.
Yeah, no, it was, although the Authenticity Project was my first novel, I had started writing before, because I started writing about 6 years ago. As a child, I used to write all the time. I loved writing, but I stopped when I started, went to university, I started work, and, all I wrote were, emails and PowerPoint presentations. And I sort of, I lost my love of writing. And then about 6 years ago, I found myself in a position where my alcohol intake had got completely out of control, and it had gradually crept up on me, and I got to the point where I was drinking way too much, and I knew I had to quit drinking, but I was too ashamed to tell anyone and to ask for help, and which now feels stupid, but then I just didn't feel I could talk to anyone. So I started writing really as a way of therapy, and I started writing a blog initially, and I called it Mummy Was a Secret Drinker, and it was like an online diary, and I wrote every day, and I poured my heart out onto this blog. And the blog, I didn't publicize it at all, and I wrote under a pseudonym, so I didn't publicize it on social media or anything, so I didn't want anyone to know I was writing it. But thousands and thousands of people around the world found it, and that eventually was turned into a book, a memoir called The Sober Diaries. And The Sober Diaries was published about 3 years ago. And by this stage, I got so used to writing every day. It was, I got to the point where if I didn't write, I would feel sort of edgy. It was a really important part of my routine, but I didn't really want to carry on writing about myself, because apart from anything else, you'll know this with sort of, with children and grandchildren, but, by this stage, my kids were teenagers, and it's when you write about your own life, you're also writing about your children's lives. And, they were at the age where they found, oh, what a gorgeous dog. they found that intensely embarrassing, the idea that their mother might be writing, about our lives. So I thought, I can't carry on doing that. So I'll write fiction. And that's when I started writing the Authenticity Project about 3 years ago.
Do you have anything planned for the future?
Yeah, I'm editing my second novel at the moment, and it's due out next year. And I would tell you the title, but the title isn't agreed yet. So it's funny, there's always a debate about titles, I find. And, whatever title you decide, you originally decide on, the publishers always want to change it. So at the moment we're debating titles. But yes, that comes out next year, hopefully. And interesting, it's not, it doesn't feature the same characters, but a couple of the characters from the Authenticity Project sort of appear as little cameos. So if you have read the Authenticity Project, you would notice that. And if you haven't, it doesn't matter. It doesn't ruin the enjoyment of the next book. So, but it touches on some similar themes. It's got a similar feel to it, but there's, the characters are quite different.
So did the Authenticity Project have a different title in the beginning?
No, it's funny, actually. It started off as the Authenticity Project, and both my main publishers in the US and the UK said, not sure about the title, because it sounds a bit like it could be a non-fiction book. It sounds like it might be a self-help manual, something like that. And authenticity is a bit long and a bit scary as a word, and might not fit well on the cover and all this sort of thing. So they said, can you come up with something else? So I wrote some more titles, and I went, I'm not sure about those. Can you come up with something else? And we went backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And my publishers also tried to come up with something, and my agent tried to come up with something. And I think between us, we wrote about 100 different titles. And after about you know, 6 months of this, they went, actually, we think we'll stick with the original. So, but funny enough, it's being published in 31 different languages, and in most of the other markets, they've changed the title to something else. So it's all sorts of different things in different markets. So I think my favorite title that isn't the original is the French title, which translates as the Incredible Journey of the Notebook of Secrets, which I think is quite sweet.
When did you realize that the Authenticity Project was going to be such a huge success? And were you surprised by it?
Oh, yes, I was surprised. I think the moment it started to become clear was, so my agent, this would have been about, the publishing process is really slow. So I think the point at which we started talking to publishers was over 2 years ago. And my agent sent it out to, in the UK, sent it out to a list of about sort of, 8 of the main UK publishers. And she said to me, she said, look, it takes ages for anyone to get back to you. And, it'll probably be at least 4 weeks. So just sort of try not to think about it, keep yourself busy. Don't worry if we don't hear anything for a while. So I thought, okay, fine. And 2 days later, she called me, and I was at a friend's 50th birthday party. We were in the middle of this we were in a restaurant on the Isle of Wight, believe it or not. And we were sort of, I was in the middle of this restaurant, my phone rang, and I thought it was my agent, and I thought, I've got to go and take this. So I sort of left the table quietly and took the phone call. And she said, oh, we've had an offer from one of the publishers. And she said, I'm not going to take it yet. Let's just wait and see what happens. And within the next 3 days, I'd had 6 offers from 6 different publishers, and there was this big auction in play. And I think at that point, I thought, okay, this is going to do okay, hopefully. And the same thing happened then in the US. There was an auction in the US as well. So it was. I was hoping to get one halfway decent offer. I had no idea it was going to be that crazy.
That is exciting. Does anybody else want to chime in here? I don't want to monopolize. I kind of sent out the questions to the group ahead of time, So
I have a question. One of the things that I found really interesting about the characters was how, in many ways, they were all very isolated. And, especially with what we've all been living through in the past year, I think it really brings out that there's actually a lot of isolation, even when there isn't a pandemic. These were who could get together and interact and have meals together and meet at the graveyard together, which I actually really liked. I love the detail of the descriptions, by the way. So I'm just wondering, has that isolation been something that you've experienced? Because even though we're all in families, we all shared that in our introduction, we're often very alone. And I'm wondering if that had a lot to do with the characters and how you place them in the story.
That's a really interesting question, actually, because it was, it's funny how sometimes you only notice the themes of your own novel as you're writing it. You don't set out to think, oh, I'm going to write a book about loneliness. But actually, as I was writing it, it became clear to me that, each of the characters was lonely in different ways. And I think that comes from the fact that I've always been quite fascinated by, the fact that I live in the middle of a big city, and I've always lived in cities, and, we're surrounded by millions of people, and we're connected to thousands of people online. And yet, when you look at the statistics, more and more people claim to be lonely. And you know, and I think sometimes the busier our surroundings, the more people we're surrounded by, the more lonely we can feel, because it's sort of, you know, the juxtaposition between, you know, seeing people everywhere and yet feeling isolated is really sharp. And you know, so you know, if you look at each of the characters, Julian is lonely in a much more conventional way, in that he's a widower and he lives by himself, and you know, he's been alone for 15 years. And I think we see loneliness as being like that. But then you take Monica, who, you know, runs a cafe, so she's constantly seeing people, constantly surrounded by people, and she's a boss and, you know, in charge of people's careers. And you know, yet she also feels lonely because she doesn't have a special person to share her life with. And then you've got Alice, who is married and does have a baby and everything that Monica wants, but sometimes a marriage can be the loneliest place in the world. And you know, I remember when I was a young mum, and you know, I remember feeling really isolated in those days when, you know, I was on maternity leave and it was just me and this small baby at home. And you know, and it was really difficult just to leave the house, because you had to, you know, like Alice does, you have to pack a huge bag full of stuff just to even leave the house to go to the shops, and that can feel very lonely. So yeah, I think, you know, what I ended up doing almost accidentally is exploring loneliness. Hazard is lonely because he's had to cut off his, you know, whole social circle, because, you know, they were the ones that got him into so much trouble in the first place. I was talking away and I'm not sure whether, I think you maybe all disappeared.
We did lose you.
I'm not sure which point you lost me, but I was talking quite a lot about loneliness. Yeah, and I was really just talking about the fact that each of the characters is you know, is lonely in a very different way. And for me, those, you know, the times when I felt that personally was as a young mum, and then again when I first quit drinking, and I felt you know, I felt completely isolated and alone, just because I was, you know, I couldn't talk to anyone, or at least I felt I couldn't talk to anyone. So so I think, you know, we all go through those moments in life where we feel isolated, but for many different reasons.
Now, Claire, I was kind of curious. When you started the book, did you figure out in your head all about Julian, that his wife, you know, how the whole scenario went? Because it was a total surprise to me that his wife was alive at the end. That was just a shock.
But you know what, and that's a really interesting question, because, you know, I think some authors know exactly what's going to happen in their whole book when they start. Before they start, they have everything plotted out, you know, every single chapter. And other authors sort of just start writing and see what happens. And I'm sort of somewhere in between, in that I knew roughly who the characters were, and I knew what the beginning and the middle and the end was. But you know, there were whole bits that I didn't know, you know, that was I sort of left to see what happened, because sometimes as you get to know the characters better, they sort of direct the action themselves. And then some characters appear who you weren't expecting, and some who you thought would be important turn out to be less interesting. And it's sort of, I think it's sort of important to keep it a little bit malleable. And that twist in the story, nobody so far, touch wood, has told me that they saw it coming. And I think the reason they didn't is because I didn't see it coming either. so as I was writing Julian, you know, I was getting to know him better and better. And I thought, and as time went on, he became more and more complex. You know, I knew he was, you know, he was an artist and he was very lonely. And I knew that, you know, he you know, hadn't always been the, you know, the ideal person. But I didn't, you know, I found out more about him as I went along, and I found out more about his relationship with the truth, and the fact that, you know, he didn't always tell the truth, and he wasn't sometimes sure what was true and what wasn't, because he told a story so many times that, you know, he got confused sometimes about whether it actually had really happened. And then I got to that point, I thought, oh my God, he's been lying about something, you know, really big that none of us have realized. And you know, it was as much a shock to me as to anyone else. And I think that's the reason why nobody guesses it, because I think if I'd known that was going to happen, I would have accidentally dropped clues as I went along, but I didn't know it was going to happen. So there weren't any clues.
That is so awesome. I mean, I was like, that just blew me away. Oh my goodness, she's alive, because I was feeling so bad for him. And then I almost started not feeling so bad for him. It was like, well, you creep. A rogue. You were not so hot in your relationship.
Yeah, I'm quite interested by, I mean, I'm really intrigued by people's flaws, much more so than their strengths, which is why there's a quote in the beginning of the book, a Leonard Cohen quote, which talks about the cracks that let the light in. And, you know, what I think is interesting about Julian is he really has so many flaws, and yet hopefully, you know, you still come away loving him and, you know, wanting to, you know, I would love to spend time with Julian, despite everything. And, you know, and what I hope people take, one of the things I hope people take out is that, you know, we are all flawed, all of us. And it's those flaws really that make us human and make us unique and make us lovable. And, you know, accepting our own flaws and coming to terms with them, I think is an important thing to do.
So I know you said that in the when you talk about the book at the end of the book, that each of the characters, there's a part of you in each of the characters, but Riley was the most difficult to write. So I thought it would be, you know, fun to kind of see how you developed Riley, and then the rest of us go around and talk about what character we connected with and why. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Riley, I guess where he came from is, you know, for me, he was the ideal guy in many ways. And at least that's where I started from. I thought, you know, I want to write this really gorgeous guy, and somebody who is unlike everyone else. You know, so the others all had their flaws, they all had their complexities, and they're all struggling with something, and I wanted to write a character who didn't have any of that. So the idea behind Riley is that, you know, he was really uncomplicated and straightforward, and, you know, just a genuinely nice person without any side. But that made him really difficult to write because as I said earlier, I always normally start from people's weaknesses. So, you know, I start from what is this person's fatal flaw, you know, and how does that make them act? And, you know, when I'm trying to work out what somebody is going to do in any particular situation, I work from, you know, I work from that point, you know, sort of what will they find hard? What will they, you know, what will they find difficult? And Riley, because he doesn't have any of that, I found difficult to write. So yes, in a way, I guess, I wrote him by doing the opposite from what I was doing with everyone else, you know. So whereas everyone else, I was thinking, what are their weaknesses? With Riley, I was thinking, what are his strengths, if that makes sense.
okay, so somebody chime in on which character you connected with and why.
Well,
I
I'll
think
go.
I connected with all of them a little bit. I mean, you know, that's really kind of like the charm of the book. I could see things in every one of them that I really liked about them, or, you know, could draw from my life experiences, something that, you know, let me see, I'm trying to remember all their names. I don't know, probably Hazard I connected with the least, because I was married to somebody who had addictions a long time ago. And I mean, who was addicted to alcohol, I guess. And he was a functional alcoholic, but I've never really understood that, as even with all the classes and all the things I've taken about that, I've really said, you know, I guess I understand it. I just don't like it. And so I was trying to figure out how he could just stop, like just decide one day to stop. And I know some people can, but yeah, he had his struggles with it along the way, but I connected with him probably the least. Is it's the easiest to say who I didn't connect with
Mhm.
other than who I did.
Mhm.
Next.
Sure, I'll go. This is Joanne. The person who I connected with the most was Monica. I was very career focused for the early part of my life. I didn't get married till a week before I turned 33. And my career was what I put first. And although I wanted significant relationships in my life, I really didn't put any energy into that, and just didn't feel like that needed to be a priority. Yet knew that I was missing something that would be important. So I really, could relate to her and the struggles of wanting to be successful at what she knew and what she could be good at, but at the same time wanting something else as well. But all of that takes time, and it means letting go of certain things, and it means accepting, less than perfection in those things that you're doing in your work life, because you have to give time to other things. So I really, I really understood the struggle that she was experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember feeling very like Monica. I remember getting to my early 30s and feeling a real struggle between being a feminist on one hand and wanting a husband and family on the other hand, and I felt in a way that I was letting myself, I was not filling my potential, in my career, because I was also had one eye on, I also want to have a family, and it's a purely, I think it's a real female struggle. Men don't have the same, that same time pressure that we do, and I think it's my mother's generation, were so keen to tell us that we could have everything, and that it was, we didn't have to make the difficult trade-offs that they did. But it's very hard to have everything. It's very hard to have it all. It's very hard to have it all at the same time anyway. Sometimes you sort of feel like you have to have one bit first and then another bit, but you can't do the whole thing simultaneously. So yes, I wanted to write about that struggle, really. So I'm glad you associated with it.
I think for me, I probably identified with some with Alice and then some with Monica. I think that we live in a society where we feel like we have to be perfect, and to show that our lives are perfect and our families are perfect and all that stuff, but really we're not. And we'd probably connect more with people if we showed them who we really are rather than who we want to be. I think that I live in a very small community, so to everyone knows everyone, and everybody knows everything that's happening, and so it's hard to be vulnerable with people and things like that in our society. We just live kind of in this fake society sometimes, and we think everyone else's world is perfect.
Yeah, it's very true.
Okay, I'll go. I think I related to Alice because I was a young mom, and my other friends were not where I was, and I lived away from my hometown when my husband and I got married, and I didn't have a group of friends. So, and I think I agree that you do have to, you want to, the perception to be that you're happy. I'm happy with my babies and I'm happy with my life, but I was also alone and didn't have anybody to share that with. So probably more Alice.
There's a scene with Alice where Max comes home from work late and she's got mastitis, and she's been told that if she puts a cold cabbage leaf inside her maternity bra, that it will help with the mastitis. So she asked him to go out and buy a cabbage, and he comes back with a bag of Brussels sprouts, and that happened to me. So that was my husband. He actually came back with a cauliflower, but because it was Christmas, I changed it to Brussels sprouts. And I threw the cauliflower at his head. And he said, well, you know, I said, well, what did you think?
Was it Alice that had the mother who, it said that her mother was a dinner lady? Was that it? That was an expression that I've never heard before.
I didn't realize that
was a caterer. Is that what it is?
Yeah, a dinner lady is one of the ladies that serves up lunch at school.
Oh, okay. That was great. That just that expression. I loved some of the different wording, and that maybe some of them were English and I wasn't familiar with them. So it might be a British thing.
Well, my publisher in the US, Pamela Dorman, who is fabulous. She runs part of Penguin in the US, and she publishes quite a lot of British novels in the US, and she's always quite keen to save enough of the Britishisms to make it feel real. So there are some words that were changed for the US market that would have thrown people completely, but she keeps a number of Britishisms just for sort of, you know, for authenticity's sake. So, yeah.
So for me, the character, I went between Monica and Alice. First of all, Alice, much because like Sharon, I was a really young mom, and I had somewhat of a support system because my family lived in the same community. But you still feel it's just such you're first, especially, you just feel like you're going down this road that you're supposed to be the perfect mom, and you don't really know how to do that. So sometimes that can feel really lonely. And then Monica, on a different reason from everyone else, was that she's such a rule follower, and she almost takes the responsibility of everybody else's happiness. I felt like on herself, and I think I often feel like that. I'm a people pleaser, and I am just now discovering how to say no at 62 years old. So it took me a long time, but most people who know me know that I'm a rule follower. And sometimes it's so, you know, I told my husband, I want to be the crazy old lady in the nursing home that just does things that are pretty whacked out, and I can just blame it on being old because I never could allow myself to do not the, you know, if I make mistakes, I feel really guilty about it. And because I always want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So between Monica and Alice, I really resonated with them.
There's an expression actually that Monica uses that really sums her up for me, which is, she says at one point, I think quite early on in the book, she goes, "Preparation is the key to effective spontaneity." and that for me was Monica in a nutshell. You know, it's as you say, I mean, she really wants to be a bit wilder and more free and more you know, and go with the flow, but it's just not in her nature, you know.
I grew up with the expression, prior planning prevents poor performance.
Yeah.
That is so drilled into my head. So I don't think that I could have written in the authenticity book personally. But do you think it's because people are worried about how others will use that? You put your heart out there, and then someone might break it, or they might use it to hurt you if knowing so much. So I feel like I do that. I put my guard up to protect as a protection. So just wondering, I think she worded it, do people avoid sharing things about themselves because the information can and has been turned around and used to hurt them? It seems not everyone can be trusted with revealing your weaknesses and sensitivity.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And that's why when I started blogging, I did it under a pseudonym, because, I thought if anyone knew what my life was really like, they would hate me. And, and I think that was because at that point in time, I hated myself. So, I couldn't believe that anyone would know the real me and still like me, if you see what I mean. And that's why I used a pseudonym. And then, when the book was about to come out, my memoir was about to come out, and it was under my real name, and my publishers had lined up all this publicity, so on national TV and radio and press and everything. And I thought everyone is going to know my deepest, darkest secrets. And it was terrifying for exactly the reason you talked about, because again, I thought everyone was going to hate me. And then I realized afterwards, after the book came out, and I had, thousands of messages over the last 3 years from people saying how much that book helped them. And I've had 1 or 2 negative comments in 3 years. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brené Brown, but she talks about the power of vulnerability. And I think what I realized when I published that book is when you make yourself vulnerable, people are generally really, really kind, because actually, I'd already confessed to anything that people might throw at me. So, I'd already said I don't think I was a good mum. I'd already said I was I was an addict. I already said, I didn't feel like a good person. So, I thought that, actually what transpired is that people couldn't accuse me of those things because I'd already accused myself of them. And I think where you're more likely to get attacked, and when you see people who do get attacked on things like social media, often it's when they're lying about something. It's when, when it's discovered that they are not who they pretend to be. And I think that's actually far more likely to get you into trouble with other people than being really honest about who you are, if that makes sense.
What about the people you were close to? I mean, people who didn't really know you felt a connection to you. People who were close to you, did you feel like that opened you up to things, like for people who already knew you before that? Did they feel the same? Or I don't know how to put it, but.
Yeah, I mean, the people I was really close to, I showed them, I gave them a copy of the book before it came out, because I didn't want them to be blindsided by it. And, I think generally they were really proud of me, because they, realized what I'd been through and why I was doing what I was doing. So, my kids and my husband certainly were really proud of me, as were my parents. And I think possibly the people who found it the most difficult was the next level of contact. So close friends who actually, I guess, realized they didn't know me as well as they thought they had done, and I think that can be, that can be a bit tricky, but, again, I think they understood why. So, I hope that anyone who reads that book will understand why I did what I did, and hopefully not judge me too harshly.
When I reached out to Claire, and she responded to me, my first question to her wasn't about any of that. It's about my passion for canines. And my first question was, what happened to Keith? Because all I could think about was that poor dog being left alone in the park with his master gone, and what happened to him. So I know what I wanted in my mind to happen. And it happened to be that Claire's response was exactly what I had imagined would happen. But I want her to share that with the rest of you.
Well, actually, what's funny is how many people have asked me that question. And so many, after the hardback was published, which was just over a year ago now, so many people have asked me what happened to Keith, that before the paperback in the UK came out, I didn't make it in time for the US paperback, sadly, but before the UK paperback came out, I asked my publisher to add a line to right at the end of the acknowledgement, so the final page in the book, and it says, P.S. Please don't worry about Keith. Because Keith is actually adopted by Monica and Hazard, and he is the only dog allowed in the cafe, and he lives out his retirement in the cafe, and is fine. So yeah, he's okay. But it is funny how many of us are dog lovers, and it's and actually my US publisher is a real dog lover, and Keith initially had a much smaller part in the book. And one of the bits of feedback she gave me when I was doing the edits was, she goes, Claire, we need more dog. so Keith ended up having a much bigger part than he started off having.
So that brings up another question. When you, from the onset, from the start of your writing to the final publication, how much did the book change?
The essence of it stayed the same, but a number of the details changed. So there was one character who, not one of the main characters, but one of the minor characters, disappeared altogether. Some characters became more important than they were. As I said, Keith was there was more Keith by the end than there was at the beginning. There was a big debate at one stage about the ending, and actually both my editors were happy with the way it ended. But when I was talking to different publishers in the whole sort of pitch process, there were a few publishers, actually there were two in the US specifically, who questioned the ending and said, we don't think Julian should die. So there was a bit of a debate about that. And for me, it was quite important that he did, because what I didn't want to end up happening is for the book to become too saccharine. And I thought it's very easy to end everything perfectly and tie everything up in a bow, but life isn't like that. And sometimes things don't happen that you want to happen. And so I didn't want to end with it all being perfectly happy. And, I have had people say, oh, I wish he hadn't died. But at the same time, I've had probably more people say, no, that was the right way to end it. So, I think there was a bit of toing and froing on that. One thing that kept changing during the edit was what happened with Alice and Max, and that there were 3 different iterations of that. And in the end, I ended up leaving it sort of unresolved, in that, she leaves him, but the idea is that they might get back together. I don't think they do, by the way. I think she does leave him, but at one stage he was having an affair, and she found out about his affair, and I thought, no, that's probably a bit too much. And then I had one iteration where she thought he was having an affair, then discovered that he wasn't, and they got back together, and it was all lovely. And I thought, no, that's a bit too much in the other direction. And so it ended up somewhere in between. There are things like that you play with when you're editing, and sort of you try it in different ways and see which feels most realistic. And I think generally it comes down to the characters having to drive the plot, not the plot having to drive the characters. So at each stage you have to think, well, would they really do that? Would she really act like that? Would that really happen? And you know, and that's that for me, a lot of the editing process is about that. It's about trying to put yourself in the head of all the characters and check that at every stage they're doing what they would have really have done, and not just what is convenient for you that they do.
So you said your next book has a few of the characters make cameos, but I've talked to so many people who've read this book and said that they wish there was a sequel, because it's the kind of book that leaves you wondering what happened to, or what's next, or what happened. I think it's Dave that finds the book in the park, and so what happens there? So have you thought about writing a sequel, or?
Yeah, I may do at some point, but I haven't started doing that yet, because I sort of, you know, I wanted to let it settle, I guess, and do something new first. And but I may come back to it at some stage. I'm always slightly nervous of sequels, because I think sometimes, you know, sometimes revisiting an old idea, you know, can leave you and the reader feeling a bit dissatisfied. You know, I don't know many sequels that are as good or better than the originals. So I think it's it's difficult. You have to make sure it's really, really good to make it worth doing. So I haven't yet, but that doesn't mean never.
And so maybe it's just good that we use our own imaginations of what happens next.
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely keep my eyes open for that. So anybody else have anything for the good of the cause? It's been wonderful having you. It's been so enlightening. Thank you again for joining us. And I can't wait till your next book comes out. So
well, thank you everyone for having me.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.